Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Ethicast, coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia at the 16th Annual Global Ethics Summit. Special shout out to everybody who's attending virtually. We see you. We're so glad you're with us, and we hope you're having a fantastic time at the show. This episode, I am delighted to speak with Tim Morss, CEO of SpeakUp. Tim, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and thank you for attending GES. We're so glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Look, this event has been absolutely fantastic. Learned a lot. There's been such great speakers, such great networking. Everyone has been, so open, to speak with as well. It's rare you sit at a table, everyone's like, "Hey, who are you?"
Yeah.
Talking about real challenges, real problems that are going on, as well as real successes. So yeah, it's been a great event. Best one of the year.
Outstanding. Well, I'm really eager to talk to you about ways that we can kind of reduce the friction of engaging with SpeakUp systems. But before we get into all that, can you tell me a little bit about SpeakUp itself?
Yeah, so SpeakUp, we are, the name kind of speaks for itself, right? So we are a platform that, helps people, report misconduct or speak up about anything going on in their company with a, case management platform. And we're leaning pretty heavily into the, AI revolution that's happening as well. And, one of the core things we think about is how do we reduce the friction as it relates to employee reporting.
Yeah.
We've always been really focused on the reporter. The case manager is important, but we're really focused on the reporter as we're touching every employee in the company.
Now, something that's interesting about you is that you're an American, but you live in Europe. And we were talking before about how Americans and Europeans kind of have slightly different ways of interacting with their whistleblower system. So I was wondering if you could talk about that, and more importantly, perhaps what one group could learn from the other when it concerns using a whistleblower system and making the most out of it to speak out against misconduct.
Yeah, I think, really the maturity level is different between the U.S. and Europe. So I started my career in the U.S., and when I moved over to Europe, the questions you get asked were much different.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things I noticed is the different modalities of reporting. So in the U.S., the industry was really built around the call center, right? So, and I think a lot of that comes from the language. So if you're in the U.S., it's a domestic audience, everyone speaks English. In Europe, really, because it came a little bit later where people started to adopt these programs,
Yeah.
you see much more of a web-heavy approach,
Okay.
and much less of a caller approach. And it's really interesting. I think there's pros and cons to both those. One of the biggest things I'd learned is really being able to adapt your program to a global standard. I think you need to look at those different approaches differently depending on the geography that you're in. Europeans in general, they don't want to have to speak with an interpreter when they get on the phone. They want to report, in their language in a more native way and not have to go through that process. And they're also much more wanting to adapt to more digital interfaces. Whereas in the US, it still seems people want to call in through the phone and a bit of, that's what you know. I think the biggest thing people could learn is making sure they provide accessibility for both those programs.
Yeah. Now, I've heard it said that whistleblower systems in general could benefit from taking more of a B2C, a business to consumer approach when it comes to reducing the friction of using the systems and lowering barriers of entry for people to make use of these systems. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, if you think of using Facebook or a social media application, you don't need a training manual, right?
Right.
It's self-explanatory. When you look at a lot of compliance tooling, you look at, I tell everyone, go look at your own whistleblowing page right now. Is it intuitive to where you know exactly what you need to do?
Yeah.
It's probably not. Is it accessible on a mobile device where it formats appropriately for that screen?
Yeah.
I would, if you're in the US, probably not. Think about what that says to the employee about, wanting them to be able to speak up. If you're adding barriers in there, that's there. Then on the case manager side, what is everyone using right? What's the hot tool? ChatGPT.
Sure.
What are people doing right now? They're using it whether you like it or not. So we need to be thinking about providing the interfaces that people use in their day-to-day lives, rather than trying to force them into using tools in a different way. We need to adapt to where people are rather than forcing them to have to learn a whole new different system. That's my viewpoint.
Yeah. So how can ethics and compliance teams take lessons from other allied groups like marketing and communications to drive better, deeper engagement with SpeakUp in general, with whistleblowing systems in particular, to drive better results and to drive deeper engagement?
That's such a great question. I'll touch on a few points. One of them is, within a SpeakUp program, again, I go back to your reporter page. What does that look like? If you were to talk to a marketer when they are deploying a landing page for, requesting a demo,
Yeah.
they are militant about that experience. Every single field you add means you could lose 8% of your click-through rate.
Yeah.
So that really needs to be there. Does your employee really know what type of report? Like, do they know if it's bribery or fraud or they have no idea, right?
Sure.
So really thinking through that experience. Then it's also, how do we communicate these programs? How do we build awareness for these programs? I get, shocked at the amount of people who don't brand their URL is just some long string.
Yeah.
They're not using QR codes. They're not making it accessible. Really look at, partner with your marketing team, speak with them. How are they have so much insight in how you can deploy these programs and how you can, localize things to meet different audiences. Like if you translate whistleblower, maybe for a German audience, it might come across wrong and they might think it's like, hey, you're a rat, you're doing something like that. So all of those things are things marketers are hyper fixated on, and you need to take those same concepts into compliance programs.
And I'll say something further is that if you are on the ethics compliance side and you're thinking, well, I don't want to bother marketing, this isn't actually going to drive sales or anything, I can say, because I know this from experience, marketing is always looking for ways to prove their value too in the organization. 100%. And I guarantee that if ethics compliance comes to them going, you know what, we need some of your magic to figure out how to speak to our audience a little bit better, marketing will respond, and they will do so enthusiastically because it's a great internal client that helps prove that what they do is building value. So there's a really great synergy to be had there.
I totally agree. I remember, I can't remember who told it to me, but they were talking about dashboards and analytics, right?
Yeah.
And they were just like, they're just counting stuff. Like every dashboard is just like, I have this many of this, I have this many of that. What is it telling you?
Yeah.
How are you then proving, hey, this is making an impact?
Yeah.
And that's where cross-referencing your compliance data with HR data and other information you have can actually turn, hey, we have this many reports into an actual story and a narrative. And it's all about stories and narratives, right?
It really is.
Can you paint a picture and make it compelling rather than here's a bunch of statistics. We had this many of this and this many of this and this many of this.
Yeah. And marketing often considers itself as a team of storytellers. So
exactly.
that's money on the table. Don't leave it there.
I totally agree. And I'm a story person. I find a story and I probably repeat it a million times.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
So that's what it's all about.
Outstanding. Well, look, Tim, thank you so very much for joining us today. It's wonderful having you on the show. Thank you very much for bringing your expertise to our audience. And thank you for coming to Global Ethics Summit.
Thank you for having me. And thanks for the great event. It's been fantastic.
Outstanding. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. This has been another live special Ethicast coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia at the 16th Annual Global Ethics Summit. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.